This is Karen with NewClevelandRadio.net, and it is time for Avoid the Maze. And my guest today is a little bit different than many of our guests. Most of my guests I've had on are coaches that are out there working with all of us and helping guide us to find what it is we want in our life, helping us through that maze that we talk about. Today I have John Noltner with me, and I met him through Podmatch, and I was intrigued by the fact that he's a photographer. And I'll tell you, I use my iPhone a lot to take pictures, and everybody says the new iPhone, can make studio pictures look, obsolete. I'm not so sure about that. You have to have a good eye when you photograph. So I'm a snapshot photographer, to say the least. But John is a little bit more, and I've invited him on to talk to you about his journey and really how'd you get involved in photography, because it takes a lot of time and artistic knowledge to get the right picture, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Karen, thanks for having me on your show. It's good to talk with you. I enjoyed photography for years, and I suppose maybe decades before I ever really thought it could work as a career path for me. I took pictures from the time I was a little kid, and for me, it was my way to explore a place. It was my excuse and sort of my ticket to go poking around and looking at different things. But when I went to college, I was pretty heavily invested in music. I was a trumpet player. I had always been told, and so I always believed I should get a music major, and so that's what I did. But after the first year, realized I didn't really want to be a high school band director. God bless them. I'm glad that we have them in the world, but that wasn't my path. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I knew I was a good trumpet player, but I wasn't good enough to perform professionally. So I explored for a little while. And I wound up landing in the photo department, in the journalism department at my college. And that ability to tell stories with words and with images is what really drew me in.
So when you started in photography, now we're going to sort of age you to some degree. Were you doing
You can see my gray hair already, so I am aged.
Doesn't mean anything. So did you start with actual film or right into digital photography?
Oh yeah, I'm sure some of your listeners have heard of film, and that was, that's where I started. And honestly, I loved the craft. I loved the art of being in the darkroom and finessing an image to come up in the tray. And it was really hard for me to let go of that when we shifted into the digital world. I'm a little bit stubborn. I'm a little bit of a Luddite. And so I believed there was something magical about the craft of photography. And I tied that to the chemical process of development in film. And that was hard to let go of. But over time, I came to love the digital world and all of the new tools that brings to bear. So I'm a fan now. It just took me a little while.
Well, and I understand the darkroom. My husband, like I told you, is an amateur photographer. But when I first met him, he was into darkroom sales, and he was doing a photo show. And he asked me our first date if I would help him at the photo show. I knew nothing about darkroom. Okay. Nothing at all. And he said to me, "Oh, it's real easy. I'll show you a couple different things. And when people come up to the booth, describe it to them." And I learned it by rote, and I started saying it over and over again. And then finally, a couple weeks later, I said to him, "Okay, I need to get into a darkroom to see what I was talking about."
Like,
yes.
Right?
And
Yeah.
you are right. It is amazing, when you are putting it through the bath and all of a sudden this image just starts to come about and you go, wow, like there was a blank piece of paper 2 seconds ago.
Yeah, there's something magical about that. And I miss that mystery and craft. And frankly, I mean, like you said, these iPhones and the digital world, the algorithms in those things are so good these days that a lot of people can make really good pictures. And so it democratized the process a little bit. But for me, photography is still about telling a story. And that doesn't mean just, the best sunset or the best pretty scene. It means the ability to craft a story and deliver information and elicit an emotion. And those are still things that rely on creativity, craft, and your process.
Absolutely. I mean, I can take a picture of a flower and everybody knows it's a flower. Okay. I'm sure if you took a picture of a flower, there's going to be more to it. There's going to be more depth. There's going to be more color. There's going to be more of something. And even if it's not the story that you saw in it, we're all going to find a story in that image.
Yeah, I hope my wife, whose name is also Karen, I hope she doesn't mind me throwing her under the bus here, but she's got a
Okay.
good sense of humor. And we have a little exercise we do on social media sometimes called He Saw, She Saw. And we will both take and she will be the first to tell you she's not a photographer. And so we will agree on a subject and we will take a picture of the same thing and then we'll post them side by side and show our different visions. And she's always a good sport about that. But we just did it. We were hiking a little stretch of the Appalachian Trail and there was a little orange colored salamander on the ground. And we did He Saw, She Saw. And in Karen's picture, you can't really tell that it's a salamander. And in my picture, it's the most beautiful and compelling senior portrait of a salamander you've ever seen.
Well,
So.
And you have that eye for it. You know, she may be similar to me that, oh, I see this. Oh, it's beautiful. Click,
Right.
And yet my husband and I do something very similar, although we don't post it, but we'll both be taking the same picture and I'll be done and I want to keep walking. And he's just like moving around and
Got a little
trying
more
to,
work to do.
yeah. And afterwards I'll say to him, well, what took you so long? And he'll say, when you see it, you'll see the difference. It is obvious. And that's
Well, and
okay.
it becomes about understanding how a scene translates on the camera, how the lens sees it differently maybe than your eye is going to see it, and understanding how that's going to render.
Exactly. So you started in college thinking about music. You went into photography. They're both in the arts. They both take creativity. And typically both of them are arts where there's some sensitivity. So when you started working with your photography, what was that like? Was it, somebody telling you what to go photograph, or was it, oh, I'm just going to go photograph this and I'm going to create a story and hopefully somebody buys it?
Yeah, it's a good question. And both are true. Yeah, for the most part, I've made my living as a photographer. So I worked as a staff photographer for a daily newspaper, and you have 12 to 15 people telling you what to photograph every day. And then I went to work at a commercial studio doing a lot of advertising work. And you have clients that are not only telling you what to photograph, they're telling you exactly how to photograph it and which way to look at the apple and what color light to use. And that those all have good applications. But and in that commercial world, I learned a lot of technique and I learned a lot of skills about lighting and composition. But what I was really interested in was the storytelling. So I returned again to the world of magazine photography. And I was self-employed, which means that you say yes to every job that's offered to you,
Right.
so that you stay busy. And some of them were really exciting and compelling travel stories. I've had the chance to photograph in 38 countries and on 48 states in the US. But most often on assignment, someone would say, hey, we need you to cover this story of this trip to Cuba. And then you go to Cuba for a little while. Every once in a while, I would have a pet project that I really wanted to explore on my own. And I would pitch the concept to editors until I found somebody who said yes. So I did that for about 20 years until I started this new project called A Piece of My Mind. And we we can talk about that down the road, but
Absolutely.
that was completely self-assigned, and continues to be going forward.
So from what I understand, I have an elementary school friend who actually just retired um, as a API photographer, I think was.
Yeah.
She's been all over the world and uh, has been in places that I wouldn't have even dreamt of. A wonderful, wonderful life. And when I look at her photography, I try to remember what she was like in elementary school, and she was very artistic. Um, but back in the day, most of us had either brownie cameras, if anybody out there knows what a brownie camera is, and some of us actually had Polaroid cameras. So neither one of them were fantastic cameras that could really zone in on a subject. But I've watched her career and I realize that not everybody can have a full lifetime career in that arena because of all the travel, because of all the places you're going. And oftentimes you're competing with other photographers. So if their work is considered better than yours, um, a lot of your work is for naught, correct?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of competition out there, and there are a lot of amazingly talented people. So you need to hustle if you're going to make it work. That being said, I have seen a lot of amazing photographers who cannot make the business end of things work because that's not one of their skill sets. I've also seen some pretty mediocre photographers who have a great business because they're really good at the hustle. And so it's this really interesting for me, photography is this really interesting combination of the aesthetic with the art and composition and lighting of it, the technical with understanding how your equipment works and how to expose properly, and the business, so that if you want to be an independent artist, so you can make it all work together and manage a cash flow. And I think that for a lot of people, being creative on your own terms is really compelling. When you want to create, when you feel inspired to create, but having to create every day can start to be a burden. And I think a lot of people burn out, and to have to innovate and find a new way to see something each and every day takes a special kind of person who can show up and do that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm glad you said that because, um, sometimes we look at photographers, artists, songwriters, musicians, and we'll say, oh, what a wonderful job they have. And yes, it's wonderful when they're doing the art that they love, but
Mhm.
that hustle sometimes can take a lot out of them, or something like the pandemic that like shuts them down for a while. And so, you know, I created something like a couple weeks ago and it says, be careful what you wish for. You just may get it. And if you get it, it may not be what you want. And, um, you know, I've seen that a lot when I decided to go independent and start doing podcasts 7 to 10 years ago. Um, I knew that there was going to be burnout times, and there
Yeah.
are. And I address them. And, I have to sort of like look around and see how I can be a little more creative and enjoy it, again. And I'm sure that happens with photography as well.
Well, I think it's true with anything, right? You get to do your dream job, but still your dream job is only maybe 30% of what you dreamt it would be.
Right.
And the other 70% is the hard work of showing up and marketing and billing and paying your
And who
invoices and
wants to
all of
do
it.
that, all that?
Yeah, it just has to be done. It's a
Right.
part of life. But I think in a similar fashion, but something different. We were just along the Appalachian Trail a week ago and was talking to one of the shop owners along the trail. And, this is a trail that goes 2,100 miles up our
Right.
eastern seaboard through the Appalachian Mountains. And there are lots and lots of people, myself included, who have dreamt of hiking that trail for a long time. And I think the statistic I heard is that within the first 50 miles, a third of the people drop out because it is not the romantic notion and the dream that they imagined it to be, but in fact, it's hard work and blisters and bugs that bite you and uncomfortable bed rolls at night. And, and so I don't know if I had known what the full deal was about being a freelance photographer, I probably still would have gone down that path. But there's a lot of time doing just the hard work and logistics of making it happen. And then there's a little bit of time where you get to go to Cuba and shoot a story, or travel to India and photograph in the market, or, meet some compelling person and try to make the most beautiful portrait of them. It's all a trade-off that's worth doing, I think.
Absolutely. So what made you decide to put the book together? I mean, that's a whole new avenue too. Although
Yeah,
you
that's a
said you've
whole
written
other
a
thing
couple.
that
Yeah.
if I'd known how much work it was, I might not have said yes. But we've got 3 books now, and let me back up a little bit and talk about this personal project I have called A Piece of My Mind.
Yes.
PEACE, that kind of piece. I started this in the recession. I like to say the economy handed me some free time, and my workload dropped quickly and dramatically as a freelance photographer. And at that same time, I was increasingly frustrated with the quality of our national dialogue. I was concerned about all the things that ask us to look at what can separate us. Well, if you look back 12 years, that seems like child's play compared to what's going on now.
Right.
But I wondered if there was something I could do with my photography and storytelling instead to remember what connected us, to remember that common humanity. So I started this really simple process of interviewing people like you do. And because I'm a photographer, I'd shoot a portrait as well. And over time, gathered these stories into an exhibit that included the portrait and a little bit of text from their interview. And then people said, well, you should make this a book. I'd love to bring this home so I could study the stories a little bit more. So we produced a book, and that first book and exhibit was all stories from Minnesota. But then we took the time to drive 40,000 miles across the country, and we did the same version all across the United States. And for our most recent book that just came out last fall, it's called Portraits of Peace: Searching for Hope in a Divided America. I realized that I had been telling other people's stories for so long, for a decade already. But I realized that I also had something to say about that process of encountering difference, of challenging my own expectations, of recognizing my own blind spots, and really the exercise of finding the beauty and the wisdom in everybody that you encounter. And so that's the third book that's more recent, which talks a little bit about my story of creating this project.
Well, just hearing that is so important for all of us. Again, when we started this podcast, a lot of that thought was in our minds that too many of us, myself included, we'll see a picture of somebody, read a little blurb of them, and then you identify who you really think they are, good, bad, or indifferent. And you may find out along the line, hey, your first thought was absolutely wrong. And that's when I started saying, I don't want to be judgmental. I didn't think of myself that way, but I realized I was. Somebody would call me up and say, hey, I'd love to be on your show. And I'd ask them why. And if I didn't hear what I thought I should hear, I was labeling them as somebody I didn't want.
Yeah.
And I realized that it wasn't even evening out. And I thought, there's something wrong with me. And I think it takes that first acknowledgement to say, hey, I have to be more mindful. I have to open my eyes. I'm not a perfect person, so I don't expect anybody else to be perfect. And once you do that, you find people.
Yeah, I think it's a really human thing to do. You know,
Yeah.
we automatically categorize, we make quick assessments, we jump to conclusions, and some of that is useful as we try to navigate a really complex world, but some of it blinds us to the realities of life as well. And so our entire methodology has been to walk into spaces that I'm unfamiliar with. You know, to if I'm trying to learn more about immigration, well, then we'll go down to the border and we'll interview people, you know, a broad cross section of human beings, people who are seeking asylum and activists and border patrol agents and ranchers down there. And we'll try to understand this a little bit better. We want to talk about, I want to understand homelessness. So we go out to Skid Row and we talk to people who are advocates and allies. We talk to people who are unhoused. You know, so people who are leaders in the field who are doing the work, but also people who are impacted by the things. And we try to have a real grassroots and human understanding of things. And as it turns out, whatever issue you want to talk about, it's way more complex than you might imagine
Right.
before you get on the ground. I mean, everywhere we just came from the Southwest where we were talking about drought and water resources. And I was at Lake Powell and Lake Mead and talking to people who are impacted by this. And every place we go, when we leave, I recognize the work is left undone, right? We've really created this body of work that can dig into it and uncover it a little bit, but no matter where we go, there's so much more to the issue and there's so much complexity. When these arguments get boiled down to black and white, right and wrong, they're really missing the nuance and the complexity that illuminates the truth, I think.
So when did this book come out for you? Because it sounds like it's a brand new baby.
Yeah, it came out September of last year. September 21st is the International Day of Peace. That was our release date. And it was published by Broadleaf Books, which is a faith-based publisher, which is great because I'm a faith-based person. But it's not about theology. It's about how, for me, it's about how my faith enters into day-to-day life and how we treat other people. But yeah, it came out in September. I finished writing it, you know, in the last election cycle. I finished writing it, editing it just as when George Floyd was killed in Minneapolis. And so there's a lot of stuff going on. And we sort of acknowledge in the introduction of the book, but that by the time you hold this book in your hands, we might be living in a whole different world. You know, the headlines of the day will change and the issue of the moment will change, but the fundamental issues of respect and dignity and justice, those are universal and those remain. And those are the sort of ideas we talk about with the encounters with these folks that I interviewed.
So let me just ask a simple question, because I have friends here in the Cleveland, Akron area who go down to, as you described, Skid Row, and they provide clothing and food, and but yet our public officials don't like it. And that's the thing that I don't understand. Okay. You have these individuals who probably did not choose to be living on the street, especially living on the street in a climate that can go from snow to sun in 24 hours here.
Yeah, you've got it all in Cleveland, right?
And you have humankind providing for them. Okay. And then you have the public officials who are saying, no, don't go down there because we really don't want them there. And it's like, well, then what can we do about it? You know,
So I don't know the politics of Cleveland, but it sounds like you're articulating an argument that if we take care of them too much, they'll tell their friends and then we'll get even more homeless people
well,
here.
And that's how I read it. I don't know if
Mhm.
that's what they're actually saying, but to me, you know, there's something that we can do, and it starts with some generosity. Okay.
Yeah.
And kindness. I mean, if I were down on my luck, I certainly would want somebody at least to be kind and pleasant to me,
Mhm.
not turn their back. So when you're down there taking these pictures, are they are they willing, or are they more afraid to be involved?
Um, the folks who are homeless,
Right.
is that
Yeah.
the question?
Yep. Right.
Yeah. So there's a dynamic that happens on Skid Row that is unlike anything I'd ever seen. Where when I walked onto Skid Row, I think there were between 5 and 8,000 people who are unhoused in this 50 square block area of Los Angeles.
Wow.
So I didn't really take any photos on Skid Row itself because I think that there is a really, if you stand on the street and you hold up a camera and point it randomly at people, I think that there's a lack of dignity. And I think that there's a big opportunity to be misunderstood in that. The same way, I think if I wanted to understand something about the conservative political movement, I would be more likely to do that by talking to an individual conservative than I would going to a Trump rally, because there is something with a large gathering of people that changes the dynamic and makes it
Okay.
really difficult to have an in-depth conversation. So what I did when we were on Skid Row is I interviewed, oh no, I'm going to forget names. There's so many names in my brain. Andy, who is the head of the Union Gospel Mission there. And he, I interviewed him, and then he was able to connect me with a few people who are working with their services and working through their process to regain their independence. And so I'll interview people there. And so sort of by default, we encountered people who were willing to share their story, who were willing to open up. And I let people know very clearly when we sit down and do these interviews that we use these stories publicly, and we use them to help encourage conversation. And we also use them to help people start exploring really complex issues. And so there are ways to do that well in the world, and there are good places to do that. And there are places where that particular model doesn't work. So we don't just walk up and down the street and say, "Hey, how would you like to talk?" We invite people, we explain the process, we set aside a couple of hours so that we can have a full conversation. But certainly the people who I spoke with uh, were really happy to share their story. Kate Adair, who lives in Corvallis, Oregon, she was also unhoused, and she said that one of the most difficult parts about living that way was when she saw the scorn and the ridicule and the judgment coming from other people. So I think when your perceived response of your officials who are like, no, 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 don't go do that, don't engage them. To me, that's a fear-based response.
Well,
That's a response that says we have to keep them away because they're going to mess up everything we worked hard for. The compassion and the position of abundance says, look, we are the richest country in the world, and we have resources beyond imagination. If we have also the will to change this, we can make a difference. And that starts by recognizing somebody's humanity. That starts by acknowledging somebody's dignity and working with them to see what support they need to move out of the situation that they're in.
well, and we need a conversation like this more and more, because um, we've taught young children to be afraid. And I
Yeah.
know when I was growing up, to some degree, that was my understanding, leave that person alone. And I've
Don't
learned
get
since then,
involved.
that's
Don't get
right, don't get
involved.
involved. Um, but the reality of it is that could be your cousin, your next door neighbor at any given time. So, we
Yeah,
need
I
to have
mean,
that compassion.
the thing that has occurred to me getting in proximity to this issue and talking with folks in person is that, we are all a little bit more fragile than we imagine ourselves to be. And these folks are not that different from you and I. Hey, I want to point your listeners towards a resource if you're interested.
Absolutely.
Right now, I'm in Washington, D.C., and I was here because what day is it? Is it Monday?
Monday.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So on Saturday, the Poor People's Campaign had a moral march on Washington and had, I think their numbers, they said there were about 150,000 people there. And it is for poor and unhoused and low wage individuals in the United States. And the Poor People's Campaign is run or coordinated by the Reverend William Barber, who runs Repairers of the Breach, and the Reverend Liz Theo Harris, who runs the Cairo Center in New York. And they have this nationwide campaign to change policy and to try to bring attention to the plight of poverty in the United States, you know, the richest country in the world. And so we were here for that march and to gather stories. And I would just encourage people, if they want to learn more about those issues, to look up the Poor People's Campaign. And there's just an abundance of resources there.
Well, I certainly appreciate you sharing that with us because many of us have no idea. And sometimes, even if we think that we're going to Google it, you may come up with the wrong information. So
Yeah, right,
thank you for
right.
that. So how can we purchase your book? How can we get the book so that we can actually get a deeper feeling as to wanting to make some change?
Yeah, so I have a little postcard for my book that has been serving as a coaster, so it's a little ripply.
Okay.
But this is the book, and it's called Portraits of Peace, Searching for Hope in a Divided America. It's available at bookstores everywhere. If they don't have it on the shelf, they can order it. They can order it from Amazon and Barnes and Noble, all those places. It's available as a print book, as an ebook, and as an audiobook on Audible.
Okay.
They can also go to our website, which is apieceofmymind.net, PEACE, and they can order it there. And I'll tell you, there's a couple of really interesting resources on the website as well. One of them is extended content. So if you go and it's organized in order that you read through the book. So if you read somebody's interview, Hashim Garrett, who's right in the introduction, but if you want to hear Hashim talk, you can scroll through this content, click on his picture, and you can listen to his audio interview.
Oh, how wonderful.
There are discussion questions for each of the people. There are behind the scenes photos of what it looks like when I'm doing the portraits. And so there's a whole bunch of added content on my website. And also, one of our goals for this book is, again, to encourage conversation. So we have a lot of churches and school groups and community groups that do book clubs with it. And right on our website, we have a discussion guide that can set you up to either do it all in one session or to break it into 4 different sessions. And it's got a bunch of questions that can help guide conversation around some of these issues.
I love that. And if any of our listeners are interested and want to have further discussions on this, we certainly would be considerate of that, because you know what? We've got to make this world a better world. I grew up in the 50s and everything was supposed to be beautiful and perfect for the rest of my life. And I'm not complaining about my life, but we haven't been as good as we should be to our fellow man. And that's not the way I was brought up. So, John, thank you for joining us. One quick question though. So your wife looks at things differently than you do. Okay. But you've been traveling the good part of your adult life. Does she get to travel with you at least?
Oh, I'm really glad you asked that question, because 2 years ago, in the middle of the pandemic, we decided we weren't seeing each other enough. You know, our kids were growing. We didn't really care about mowing the lawn anymore. So 2 years ago, we sold our house in Minneapolis, where we raised our family for 20 years. And we bought an RV and we hit the road. So we are traveling together full time now. So we may have gone from seeing each other a little, not enough, to seeing each other 24/7. But but we travel really well together. And so we started out in a 34-foot trailer that broke in California. So we put it in storage while the warranty worked out, and we downsized into a van that we named Vinny. And we're living full-time in a van as we cross the country, looking for stories of hope, encouragement, and transformation.
I love it. That is my husband's dream. He wouldn't drive anything bigger than a van. So, and I keep saying, how could we do that? I don't know, but if you're doing it,
It's
maybe we can do it too.
we're enjoying it. We won't, I mean, we'll get a house again someday, but right now we're enjoying the road.
I love
And
it.
you know, there is a lot of work to do in our country, but there's also a lot of beauty and amazing people, and we've had the good luck to meet a lot of them.
And you mentioned Minneapolis. There's another connection you and I have. I went to high school in Minneapolis. I lived there for
Oh, you
4 years. And back then it was I felt it was very safe and
Mhm.
comfortable. But over the last couple of years, it sort of scares me what's happening there. And I just hope it's isolated and not the whole area, because the Twin Cities are beautiful.
Yeah, you know, we have a deep love for the Twin Cities, and yeah, like any urban place, it has its challenges, but I love what happens there, and we're always happy to return.
Absolutely. Well, if you get near Cleveland, you'll have to let us know. We'd
We will
love to
look you
see
up
you.
for sure.
All right. And all this information will be in the show notes. No excuse not to get John's book. You want to hold it up one more time?
Oh, yeah, here it is.
There it
And
is.
and
Or
let me just add,
sure.
on our website, if you are doing a book club with this, there's a package where you can get 10 books plus 30-minute Zoom with me to talk about it after your book club is done reading.
Wonderful.
So always happy to do that with groups that decide to read the book.
Wonderful. Well, again, thank you. Enjoy Washington, D.C. And
Yeah,
we'll
thanks.
catch
We'll
up
see if we
again.
can straighten them all out here while we're here.
Sounds good. Take care
All
now.
right, good to talk to you, Karen.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.